Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And because our Parliament and Tory party are so weak and limp-wristed, we are seeing basically no changes on the political landscape thanks to Parliament and the Tory party that command an 80-seat majority, and instead we have to constantly follow Nigel Farage for decent wins in the current clown world culture war. Which, to be honest, I might start just calling the clown war, because it is a bunch of clowns versus everyone else who is normal. So we may as well get the good news out of the way first. Nigel Farage to bank with Lloyds after Coots account closure. Former UKIP leader was rejected by a string of high street lenders over his political views. Which at this point we can say with certainty was the case, despite what all leftists were saying. But luckily, finally, he has found a bank that is more than willing to actually give him their business. So Nigel Farage will start banking with Lloyds after the controversial closure of his Coots account. The former UK Independence Party leader said on Friday he was relieved to have been offered an account by Lloyds, Britain's biggest mortgage provider, after he was rejected by a string of other high street lenders because of his political views. It comes after his accounts with Coots were closed over the summer, after staff decided his views did not align with their bank's own values as an inclusive organisation. When the row went public, it triggered a furore that led the resignation of Dame Alison Rose as chief executive of Natwest, which owns Coots. An official inquiry into the debanking was also launched. Mr Farage, who is a presenter for television channel GB News, said his offer from Lloyds, which was the first reported by Sky News, came after big-name high street lenders had turned him down in recent months. And naturally, Nigel Farage is very relieved about this, because after having your bank account taken away from you, all because a couple of Labour MPs and Guardian articles, and opinion pieces actually, by the way, have stated that you're a massive racist, don't believe that net zero is sensible, and call you every other sort of ism under the sun, you are obviously going to be relieved when you finally can get a bank account, despite the fact that pretty much every other bank doesn't want any business with you. But of course that's not the end of this video. I'm not going to just take 2 minutes out of your day to let you know that Nigel Farage has a bank account. No, Nigel Farage went to Twitter to tell us what his big segment on GB News was going to be about yesterday. So his tweet said, "On GB News tonight I will release bombshell leaked documents from Natwest Group. These new comments made by Dame Alison Rose's team are even worse than I could have imagined. Tune in for 7 PM, and here's the video."
Natwest 3 months to come back with my subject access request, more than the normal 30 days. They said the reason for the delay is that it was complex. Well, now I've got it.
Yes, good things come to those who wait. The cynic in me would be screaming at the moment that they are obviously doing this to wait for the flames of recency bias to die down, so that when they do finally release it, it won't be in the news as much and Farage won't get as much attention. That is what the cynic in me is saying. Though actually when we go into it, you will probably see why it was actually quite complex. I mean, the thing's 600 pages. Don't get me wrong, I think you can collate a document in 600 pages, but I would not also be surprised if they were trying to redact quite a lot of the worst things that were said.
In the very same week, when the NatWest board meets on Thursday, we get quarterly figures on Friday, and Dame Alison Rose's final pay will get decided this week. Now, she's due to get 11.6 million quid.
I really, really do hate the idea of severance pay. How can you oversee such a colossal, terrible, embarrassing mistake like this and still walk away with more money than more than 90% of the population will see in 5 years of their own wages? It's just absurd, literally failing upwards.
But have a think about the culture within NatWest Bank. Not Coots, the subdivision who I bank with, but NatWest, the parent company. I am going at 7 o'clock on GB News to show you some of the comments about me that were made by Dame Alison Rose's team. You have never seen bile and prejudice like it.
And you would genuinely be right. I mean, the official dossier has not been released yet, like the previous one from Coots was. And given it's 600 pages, it might be some work to get through, but I am more than willing to actually see what that dossier actually says, because I was stunned by the Coots one. I mean, the playlist for the previous videos are down in the description. It still blows my mind to this day that the Guardian, a Guardian opinion piece, that only cites another Guardian opinion piece, was used as evidence against Farage. But as far as I can tell, that vindicated me for taking the absolute rip out of the Guardian every week, or every 2 weeks, I should say, for 3-4 years at this point. And well, I ain't gonna stop now, given that they clearly have power. So, let's go through Nigel Farage's GB News section.
Good evening. 3 months ago, I put in a subject access request to Natwest Bank, who are, of course, the parent bank of Coutts. Normally, under the law, an SAR should come back in 30 days. However, they wrote to me and said it would take 3 months to come back because it was complex. Well,
as we went through before, cynic in me says, they were probably hoping that this would all blow over, but Farage, he is not going to let this go. Why would he let this go? Why would you ever attack someone who presents a primetime show on one of the most popular news channels on British television? It's obviously just going to be a complete shot in your own foot, but, well, apparently this is what Natwest are like. They thought that they could take him on.
Well, I was slightly tipped the wink on Saturday when Mohammed Kamal Saeed, who is the interim CEO of Coutts, said...
So I'll read the letter for copyright reasons. Dear Mr. Farage, today you will receive, via your lawyers, the response to your third data subject access requests. This includes commentary from other clients and members of the public who contacted the bank and has been made available to you in a separate document. Thank you for your patience whilst we process this complex request. In completing your DSAR, our processors have uncovered some inappropriate comments and poor behaviours for which I would like to apologise and reassure you that we were following up on these as appropriate. As I said in my previous letter to you, we are committed to learning the lessons from this so that in future we live up to the high expectations our clients rightly have of us. Yours sincerely, Mo.
Well, I really hadn't I not, been tipped the wink. So in the 600 pages of documents, and we've just begun to have a look at it.
I mean, I'm very surprised that he just gleans over that fact. In the 600-page document, how does any bank have a 600-page document on anybody? I could understand with someone like, say, I don't know, George Soros or Bill Gates, who obviously have so much money, they are obviously investing all of it in possibly millions of businesses. They have just that much money. But someone like Farage, who, okay, was an inner-city trader and does own multiple properties and does have a few jobs and gets income from all sorts of places, I can understand it being large, but 600 pages? That just seems absurd to me. And also, the fact that the CEO of Coutts has had to specifically say, you know, sorry for the rude behaviour of some of the people in the dossier, it really does go to show, as Farage indicated before, that there is a culture at Coutts and Natwest where there is just open disdain for Farage, certainly, but also people like Farage. They were probably, and in fact I know because I've done some research, that they were in fact very happy that Nigel Farage was kicked out of Coutts, and hopefully I'll go through a few details here.
It begins by them deciding, you know, whether the account should be closed and talking about my extreme opinions. And actually what they have to say about this is quite extraordinary. And they say, if we close his account, I'd imagine journos would presume that it's one of the following. He is broke, he is involved with something shady, or we're doing it for political reasons.
Well, absolutely all three of those reasons were reported on, and obviously the ones that focus mostly on it was done for political reasons turn out to be correct. Because as far as we're concerned, he's not broke, he's still a millionaire. And as far as I'm concerned or know, his money situation is perfectly adequate. Obviously, Coutts is a very elite bank, and I believe there was news that you needed a threshold of at least £1 million in an account to keep holding it there. But as gone through in the previous videos, if that is the case, you should at least send a warning letter out that your account will be closed because there's not enough money in it. But Farage obviously never got that, and Coutts obviously have acknowledged that they never warned Farage. And then obviously we went through their dossier last time, and as mentioned quite a few times here because I still find it unbelievable, the Guardian articles and opinion pieces were used as evidence against Farage, along with total lies made under parliamentary privilege, so you can't even punish Chris Bryant for just lying to Parliament about Farage having been given £500,000 from the Russian state, when in reality it was probably a few thousand for making a couple of appearances on Russia Today way back in 2016 and 17. And obviously when kicking Farage out of Coutts, the team that were in the process of kicking him out of Coutts were very much aware that the journalists probably would go on the political reasons route because it was true.
They go on now to say that if they didn't close my account, imagine what the impact might be. Consideration on the impact on staff with retaining a client who has been so vocal with racist, xenophobic, misogynistic and anti-Semitic views.
I mean, at this point, I'm just making the video for the same reasons that the American soldiers were taking too many pictures of the Holocaust, because we all know this is true, but I want to document this to the point where it is absolutely undeniable that the only reason that Farage had his Coots account taken away was because of his political views, and as they're saying, his extreme opinions, in quotes, which apparently include anti-Semitism. When's he been anti-Semitic? As far as I remember, it was because he used the word globalist to describe Grant Shapps, which, given that we have massive protests that are being organised by jihadist groups in London who are openly anti-Semitic, I just don't buy any cause of anti-Semitism from any leftist, because they are all playing apologia for that type of thing. I would not be surprised if these same people were in that London tube shouting Free Palestine along with the tube driver.
Well, apart from all of that being absolutely vile and appalling, I suppose they thought if I stayed a client, there might be a terrible mental health impact. Just imagine the poor darlings at Natwest head office.
I mean, it is quite mad that people will leave a job at a bank over the fact that they are doing business with a very high-profile politician who is clearly within the purview of parliamentary and European politics, given that he was constantly voted into the European Parliament when we were part of Europe. It's just impossible to have a safe and healthy society when there is this much disdain for your other countrymen. I mean, don't get me wrong, I absolutely hate communists, but I'm not going to leave a company if it's run by a communist. Or at least I wouldn't leave it because they were a communist. I would leave it because they would inevitably run the company into the ground. Or if communists run businesses or anything to go by, I would leave before they go off with all the money, while pretending that they were running a perfectly reasonable worker co-op. But even that's more extreme than this case, because this isn't a bank run by Nigel Farage. This is just a bank doing the most basic of their business with Nigel Farage, and nobody even knew that until Coots decided to kick him out. I know it was claimed in the dossier that it was made public before, but realistically it was a footnote Times article from years ago where it was mentioned, to which Nigel Farage hadn't even mentioned to anyone that he had a bank at Coots. It was just the Times doing some investigative journalism and found some mortgage papers saying that Nigel Farage had business with Coots, and that was it. Technically, yes, that is public knowledge, but realistically, given that absolutely nobody came out and said, oh yes, actually Nigel Farage was with Coots, we know this from this Times article, when he was hiding the identity of the bank that he was doing business with, I think it's fair to say that it wasn't common public knowledge.
But one of the key reasons I was debanked was over climate change, where they make it absolutely clear a particular area to consider is NF's stance on climate change. It does not align with the bank's purpose or B Corp objectives. Now, you know that B Corp, of course, B Corp, the organisation based in America that puts pressure on both the public and private sectors to go for a highly politicised agenda.
And while he's focused on net zero, I just want to make the point again. This is exactly where, in the previous dossier, we saw that Nigel Farage was against net zero. And at the top, as you can see, on the 13th of March 2022, from The Guardian, Nigel Farage campaigning for a referendum on the government's net zero policy to decarbonise the economy by 2050. So their source is a 13th of March 2022 Guardian article. Here is that article. It's a Guardian opinion piece, which, as hopefully fans of this channel will know, they are not exactly the most trustworthy source of news to ever have graced the print papers and online news articles of the 21st century. In fact, a majority of them are absolutely barking mad. The fact that this was used in an official dossier to debunk Nigel Farage still blows my mind, but it just goes to show that These people clearly are Guardian readers, and the meme about Guardian readers is absolutely 100% true. Do not trust anyone that reads The Guardian.
They seemed very, very pleased when the account was closed by saying they hoped very much that had taken me down a peg or two.
Yep, just total open disdain for the man. And I know people that are fairly Remain and fairly left-wing on a lot of issues who, throughout this entire ordeal with Nigel Farage, completely agree that what was done to him was just horrible. And this is the thing. We need a left-wing in this country that is not openly for this type of thing. We need a left-wing in this country that isn't completely trying to destroy anyone to the right of Mao. And there are people out there like that. It's just, unfortunately, they are the normie types that aren't fully and completely within the current British institutions, whether it be the NHS, academia, or quite clearly, as we can see now, banking groups.
And they were, I think, even more thrilled when they saw the BBC headline. And this, of course, was the kicker. This is when Dame Alison Rose had broken client confidentiality, had briefed the business editor of the BBC, and the headline was, Nigel Farage bank account shut for falling below the wealth limit, which we know not to be true.
Well, it turned out not to be true insofar as he wasn't warned that he was under the wealth limit. And it now has just turned out from all these dossiers that it is obviously the cover they were using to try and hide the fact that they wanted to get rid of him. Quite frankly, it is probably entirely just because of Brexit, which is why they've had to pathetically try and get all these bits of evidence together, quoting Guardian opinion pieces, to try and get him kicked out of the bank, which, as it turns out, did succeed. And obviously he's not going to go back to it, because why would he trust Coutts again? He's right to go over to Lloyd's.
And that led to much internal debate. And one of Alison Rose's team concluded that it was really very simple. It was just because I was some kind of awful human being. Yes, you're an awful human being, NF, lol, laugh out loud.
Well, there's that, and there's also the gloating of saying, oh, thank you for the publicity, Nigel, because clearly this team are under the impression that there's no such thing as bad publicity. Well, this has obviously been bad publicity for Natwest and Coutts. Hence the apology to Nigel Farage in the letter, and obviously hence they have even offered him his accounts back, which he has just completely rejected. So, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, absolutely everyone in this team should be kicked out of banking for life. They cannot be trusted with the power that they held.
But I guess that pleased them because as I started to respond publicly on this internal WhatsApp group within the head office of NatWest, it was said, what's the crackpot saying now? Well, all right, maybe they get me on that one, I'll give them that.
You do have to love that about Farage, despite the fact that he is the absolute centre of probably one of the biggest banking scandals ever since 2008. He still has good humour about it. He's not bitter, he's just taking it like a classic Brit. He's being very stoic. It's just, oh, I've been completely debanked. I'm going to fight this thing tooth and nail. I'm not going to let it back me down. And you know what? Along the way, even though these people are being horrible to me, I'll have a good laugh about it. And fair enough, that's my outlook on life too. So, well done, Farage.
But here's the one that really shows you and tells you so much about these people. They actually thought and hoped that because they'd closed me down and at the time nobody else would have me, that maybe, just maybe, I would even be driven out of the country, which I find absolutely extraordinary. Have we single-handedly drive, they put, NF out of the country? As if this was really the objective. It's funny, isn't it? When I first broke this story, and when nobody else would bank me, I did actually say, maybe I simply have to leave the country.
And while we're on this screenshot, I want to point out as well that it says it's already well documented on Google who Nigel Farage banks with. And I have to say, I tried to find out in the first video when he wasn't saying it was Coutts. You type into Google, oh, who does Nigel Farage bank with? And as I was saying before, if this was well documented and well Googled, you know, I'm just some guy on the internet, but you'd expect it to have come out from somewhere other than Coutts themselves, because they were the ones to say, oh, we were the ones to close his bank account down, here's our public statement. If it was well documented on Google who he banks with, it'd be all over the news. In fact, Nigel Farage wouldn't bother trying to hide who he banks with. Because as I say, yes, technically, it was public knowledge, but it was one footnoted Times article where it came out, and it wasn't passed around every other publication from the looks of it. The Times is the only place I've seen it, and it's the only place I could find it. Which doesn't mean it wasn't public knowledge, as I'm saying, but to say it's well documented on Google, yeah, that just wasn't true.
And one of the other vile comments that we found was one that was actually physically, in a way, quite threatening. Yet one of them said that they would actually, I'd throw a milkshake at him if I was approached to open an account for him.
Yeah, I mean, this is going back to the days of as we were leaving the European Union in 2018, when milkshaking became quite the popular thing to do. I mean, Carl Benjamin got hit by a milkshake, Nigel Farage got hit by a milkshake from, I believe actually it was someone who worked for Sky News that Nigel Farage got milkshaked with. And this is why Nigel Farage is laughing, by the way, because he understands the reference, and once again he can laugh about it. But it is physically threatening, because the thing is that, as the argument went back then, if we are accepting that you can just milkshake anyone you don't like, you know, eventually it's going to be like, oh, you see someone with a milkshake heading towards a politician, oh, he's probably just going to milkshake him. And then in reality it turns out it might actually be acid. But even then, you don't have to go that far with the argument. It's just obviously wrong, and obviously you can be done for assault for throwing any sort of food at someone. It's just a shame we don't live in a world where it can be acceptable to do a John Prescott. And if anyone's wondering what a John Prescott is, well, it's this.
Where you feel that you're acting in self-defence, where there's been an incident, a provocation that leads you to feel that you have no alternative but to hit out.
Well, the only slight mitigation was one of the people there did post separately that they'd spoken to me on the telephone. Just had Nigel Farage on the phone. He is actually okay as a client. He sounded exactly like he does on TV. He is quite nice and lives not far from me. Oh, well, at least one of them there appears to be reasonable.
I mean, here's the thing, though. I'd love to see the rest of this dossier, because I'd love to see where that conversation went. Because I wouldn't be surprised if there were comments saying, oh, I bet he's just sly, though. And it's like, oh, this is just a face he puts on, really. He is a nasty piece of work, you know. If he thought you were brown, he wouldn't be polite, something like that. But fair play, at least there are clearly people in the team, as I think everyone expected, who were either indifferent or even liked Nigel Farage. I mean, there is a plurality of opinions out there, and obviously Coots is going to have that plurality of opinions.
Now, we, of course, have gone back to Natwest today, and they've come back and said, we have written to Mr Farage to apologise sincerely for the deeply inappropriate comments made about him and the poor behaviours displayed. Neither are consistent with the standards of service that our client should expect. The group has commissioned an independent review into recent events, phase one of which has been delivered to the board.
Yep, this is absolutely not going to be the end of this saga. I've already created the playlist on YouTube, so hopefully we'll end up with some more videos to go in there, because this really is... I mean, the reason I'm covering this so much is because we found mush in the clown war. We found mush on the leftist side. They can't take down Farage. They can't barrage the Farage, as the old meme goes. And it's also a great look into exactly how the culture war is fought. It's fought within management teams. It's fought by news organisations. It's fought effectively... It's a civil war of the elites, from what we can tell, because it's fair to say that Nigel Farage is of the old elite, as Matt Goodwin would say, and then obviously you've got this new elite who are all these either recent graduates or, quite frankly, lifelong Marxists, who quite literally believe it is their job to bring around some sort of revolution, and in this case the revolution includes debanking Nigel Farage, not even necessarily because he is a Thatcherite, but just because he is directly opposed to their ontologically evil ideology of intersectionalism. Because the whole reason that they put in that, oh, how are we going to retain staff, is because they think all black and brown people are going to be scared of Nigel Farage, despite the fact that there is absolutely no evidence that Nigel Farage is racist. There's not really any evidence that he has any views that are that far outside of the standard leaning right normie opinion. But obviously this is seen as Hitler to a lot of these people in middle management who have just come out of university. So of course they debanked him, and of course they're saying these things about him. Of course they think he's literally the worst human being in Britain. And the fact that they have completely self-inflicted themselves with this completely moronic publicity stunt to try and get rid of him and drive him out of Britain. It just shows that there is mush there. They can't do it. So we need to push even further. Nigel Farage needs to push for absolutely everyone involved in this case to be fired, even if they are on his side, to be quite frank, because, why weren't they stopping it?
So this is the review from a leading firm of London lawyers, whose emeritus chair says that Brexiteers are xenophobic and racist. Quite how independent that's going to be, I don't know.
Well, the fact of the matter is that if he can't give a completely impartial verdict, which, to be quite honest, I will need some pretty good convincing to see it is anything other than complete malpractice from Coutts Bank. But back to the point, if it is not a impartial ruling on what has happened here, and to be quite frank, if heads don't roll from Coutts Bank, then we need to push even harder. Push for those lawyers to be looked into. Push into why they can't be impartial. Push into having their barrister and solicitor licences revoked, because quite clearly they cannot be trusted with the power of being a solicitor or barrister. This is such an open goal for the right wing of the clown war that I don't see why we wouldn't push on it any more than we are now.
What we do know is that the board meets on Thursday. The Natwest board meets on Thursday, that the quarterly figures are out on Friday, and that on Thursday they will be discussing the pay with which Dame Alison Rose leaves the Natwest Group.
And naturally, Farage had something to say on that, because they did come up with a figure, and it was in the 11 million range. As we said before, that's just failing upwards. You have overseen one of the biggest scandals a bank could possibly see, aside from a total market crash like we saw in 2008. This is such a ridiculously large scandal. I'm surprised that she is being severed with any money, but I suppose it's part of the contract that you will have a severance pay if your contract with Coutts Bank is severed early, even if it is due to breaking the number one rule of banking, which is client confidentiality, and even if you did oversee the scandal of kicking someone out of the bank simply because of their political views and their actions as a politician, that are perfectly legal and within reason. So, push, 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 push. I'm glad to see that Nigel Farage is completely pushing on this, and I hope to see more of it. I mean, I believe he's making a database of all people who've been debanked for what they see as unjust reasons, and I really hope that something comes of it. Knowing Nigel Farage, there will be something to come of it. He does seem like one of the great generals of this clown war, but we just have to see where it takes us. In the meantime, I'm just waiting on this dossier and for even more news to come out about this, because, again, I'd be shocked if heads don't roll because of this, but we live in the clown decade and, well, things are getting worse, so maybe I should prepare for the worst.
And I would like to think that the evidence, and by the way, what I've shown you tonight is just a tiny percentage of what we'll uncover over the course of the next few days. This was the culture that Dame Alison Rose took Natwest to, and I hope the board deal with her properly.
On that point, it's certainly the one that she oversaw. Whether she led it, it's yet to be seen. I wouldn't be shocked if she was just open to talking to the BBC in the way that she did, that she was left-leaning, and given that she will have been surrounded by new elite-type people, given that that's what absolutely fills up middle and upper management of these big firms in London, that she was actually on the push to get Nigel Farage out, but obviously we need to wait and see some direct evidence of that, rather than just a management team having a little bit of a whinge about Nigel Farage while they were working on getting him kicked out, because that could have been mostly from their culture and decision-making within that team, rather than the overall at Coutts Bank. But I would honestly put my money on it is an overall culture from Coutts Bank that Dame Alison Rose is either pushing or completely indifferent to, which, to be honest, is just as bad, because it is a completely evil culture, as far as I'm concerned, and one that needs to be absolutely fought on, and one that needs to be completely eradicated from the United Kingdom. And fighting this battle will certainly help in that war. So, that's everything I had for you today. There were quite a few articles on this, but it was actually mostly just repeating what Nigel Farage had already said and gone through, so we just have to wait for the dossier now to be public. But with that, that's everything I had for you today. Laughing at the Guardian will be Friday this week, by the way, just so you all know. And of course, The Other Side of the Hill will be going on tonight, as usual, at 9 PM. And obviously catch me on Tailed Features channel every Wednesday as well. That's all the shilling done. I really should do that more. I should really probably tell everyone to like, subscribe, comment and all that as well, especially if you got to the end of the video, but it always feels really patronising, but actually reminding people does help. So please comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and do become a channel member if you think I'm worth the money. But with that, that is everything I had for you today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.